Hi, it's Natalie Pochesk
and Mia Schroeder.
Today we are joined by Dr. Lori Raetzman, a professor of molecular and integrative physiology at the University of Illinois.
Hey, it's a pleasure to join you both today.
Yes.
Thank you.
So we're with a group called Ladies in Lab Coats. It's a club started at Urbana High School. We just want to foster a community of support for women in STEM and just provide lots of opportunities and stuff. So this is our podcast where we're going to interview lots of lovely women like you and just see what your life's like.
Yeah.
All right, let's get into some questions.
So we just wanted to kind of know more about you as a person, I guess, and kind of what your life journey is like. So kind of what got you into this? Was it somewhere in high school? Was it in college? Just kind of how'd you grow up and how, you find your love for science?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I grew up in Wisconsin, not too far from here, in a suburb of Milwaukee. Neither of my parents went to college, so it definitely wasn't sure of what my future career was going to be. It could have been anything. But the house I grew up in was bordering a creek. So there's lots of wildlife in there, and then there was a little woods across from that. There was a farm field on the other side, but I loved being out of the house and just kind of playing with nature. And my dad was a good tinkerer. He built lots of things. So when he saw I liked playing in the water, he built me nets to catch frogs. He made little devices so that I could catch liver flukes. We'd put a little piece of liver in and then they would. So I think my parents really fostered in me a love of science, even if it wasn't what they thought, they were training me formally for a career in this. But that's really what got me liking science. And then in high school, as I was kind of thinking what I wanted to do for college, I actually thought I might do a psychology major. That's what I thought, because I didn't know. So I went to a small liberal arts college in Wisconsin called Ripon College. And there, it was great for me. And it's probably 180-degree difference from U of I, right? So there was 200 people in my class, in my whole class. Here I teach a class that's almost 200 people. So it's huge difference, but it gave me really a chance to have a small class size like that. I got to know the professors. I got to know a lot of the other students, and I really was able to find my passion that way. But what really tipped me off to science was that there was an ad on the bulletin board for a research program at the Mayo Clinic. I'd been doing summer work at the bakery, which is what I did during high school. I would go back in the summers for college and keep working at the bakery because it was good money. But I saw that sign and I was like, wow, this would be really cool. And it paid more than the bakery too. So it was it was a win-win all the way around. And that 100% hooked me on science. It was so great being there. It was and this is something for everyone to think about. There's lots of these internship opportunities. And I think the only way you could know for sure what a job might be like is to just kind of put your feet in there and give it a try.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
So that totally did it. I decided I was going to graduate school and then to do a postdoc after grad school. So I went to grad school in Cleveland at Case Western, then went to University of Michigan to do my postdoc, and then came here for faculty.
Have you come across any obstacles in chasing your dreams?
Yeah, so I think probably one of the biggest obstacles was just not necessarily knowing how the system worked. So many of my colleagues had done research throughout college and had done research every summer, and I didn't know how it worked. And so I think it's really important. That's what I feel for me has been important, is to try to make the rules of the game, at least what I have control over, very visible and readily available for everyone to see, because it's hard to know. And I think that's definitely has been an obstacle, is knowing what to do when.
Yeah.
Another big obstacle that I think any scientist would say is trying to get funding for our work. So there's definitely periods where there's lots of funding and I can have lots of people in my lab, and then funding gets a little tight and then the lab shrinks. And that I definitely had a period like that, and overcoming it was huge. There's definitely a lot of resilience involved in making sure you can keep your lab staffed and keep your research going.
Yeah. Has it ever been especially difficult as a woman dealing with, even as a first generation college student with imposter syndrome,
That's such a good question. So when I started grad school, the chair of the department that I picked to go to grad school was a woman, and I specifically picked that. And at that time, there was very, very few women in leadership positions, and I picked that program because I thought I needed to see someone like me. To really not have imposter syndrome, to feel like I could do it. I needed to see an example of how the person was doing it and being successful. So that made a huge difference in where I picked to go to grad school. And then I chose a female PI for both my graduate work as well as my postdoc. And again, I think that it was all to help exactly with what you said. Like I didn't know if I could do it, and seeing someone like me doing it and using them as like a close mentor to help me through was really important, because it's hard. There's not a lot of women in STEM, and especially as you start looking up the ranks, like
for sure.
Grad school, I run the graduate program for molecular and cellular biology, and this year we just admitted a class that's 64% women. Which is
so
awesome.
Good. Yeah.
But it's been 50% for a few years, more than a few years now. But if you look at tenured professors, they're absolutely not 50% of women. So I think it's really important to, help and support.
For sure, foster that.
Foster that. But the imposter syndrome is real. And having mentors is really how I get through it.
Would you consider yourself a mentor now for many of your graduate students?
Absolutely. That's actually my favorite part of my job is mentoring. So I have grad students that are doing their PhD thesis in my lab, but I also have undergrads that are working. There's actually opportunities for high school students to work in labs, few and far between, but there's some mechanisms for that. Okay. So it's really, even just for a day of job shadowing, those things I think are really, it's a good thing to see. Job shadowing is much easier. You can get into to do a day. But I love mentoring the students in my lab, but then I also was the director of graduate studies. So all the PhD students would come to me with questions, or if they were unsure of something, if they wanted to ask, I'm not sure if I should be feeling this way, or I'm not sure if this was a bad thing that happened. They would come to me, and I really love being able to be a source for that. I love doing it on campus, but I also do it at a national level. I'm the chair of a training subcommittee of one of the nationwide organization of scientific societies. So I chair the training subcommittee for that, and for the Endocrine Society, which is my home scientific society, I was the chair of the training and career development subcommittee for many, many years. So I really enjoy thinking about how to help the trainee experience.
Yeah, for sure. That's so cool. Oh my gosh.
So for those who get to travel and go to
that's one of the best parts of this job, is that you get to go everywhere. So I've been to Japan, I've been to Canada, all across the United States. So lots of traveling for both the these committees, but also so part of what we do as scientists is we need to be able to communicate our work. And one way we do it is going to conferences. Okay. And so these conferences are frequently scattered all around the country. So I'll be going to a conference in Dublin in July for the for the Study of Reproduction. And then I'll go to the Endocrine Society meeting in June in Boston.
About how many of those do you think you go to per year?
Yeah, so I usually go to 2 to 3 of these conferences, and then I travel to give talks at other universities a few times a year. Okay. So that's a fun part of this job, is that you do get to see people from all over and get to see new things.
Yeah, for sure. That's really cool.
What's your favorite place that you've traveled?
Japan, hands down. I had no idea what to expect. I'd never been anywhere in Asia, and that was just so amazing. And we specifically took the subway during rush hour because I wanted to experience what that was like. They have these stuffers with white gloves that help stuff you in to make sure that the doors can close. Yeah, it was just a totally different experience, and I loved it.
What'd you go there to do? Were you giving a talk?
Yeah, I gave a talk at the Japanese Endocrine Society meeting. The whole meeting was in Japanese, except for 4 invited talks that were in English. So I actually didn't even attend most of the meeting because I wouldn't have understood it. And they had a guide that took us around in the sessions that we weren't participating in. And it was, that was an extraordinary experience.
That's so cool.
So let's talk more about your research. What's kind of maybe give a rundown for the average person, kind of what you do.
So I study the pituitary gland. It's this tiny little thing in the center of the head. And I like to think of it as your body's text message system to tell the rest of the organs kind of how everybody's feeling. So the pituitary sends a signal called a hormone that can bind to find all different, anybody that has the receiver, it can find that organ with the receiver and talk to it to say, okay, this is working good. My stress level's good. We don't need to have any more stress hormone. Or we need to grow more. We're a child. We're not quite at our normal growth. We need to keep ramping that up. So it controls a lot of these kind of processes. And I'm fascinated with it because it has lots of different cells packed in there that have all of these, signals that are going to go talk to the body. So my research question is what makes all those different cells? Okay. So from a developmental perspective, you have just a cell that could be anything. How does it decide to make a stress cell or a metabolism cell or a growth cell? What are the signals that do that? Yeah. And I study that in two contexts. One in a fairly rare disease called hypopituitarism. So essentially hypo meaning the pituitary is not quite functioning as much as it should as opposed to hyper. Yeah. So we have hypopituitarism. So there's children that are born with this condition. And so we want to understand the genes that are necessary to make the pituitary to understand how to treat the condition. Okay. The other context we study is in the thought of environmental chemicals and how exposure to chemicals in our environment that mimic these signals, these hormone signals your body needs to be able to communicate, how these environmental chemicals impact the function and development of the pituitary.
That's so cool.
So those are things like your squeezy plastic water bottles that you see, and then you'll see things that say BPA free. So a very small part of some of the research that's gone into why BPA is out is work from our campus that has shown BPA is very detrimental to specifically the female reproductive system.
Okay, yeah, so you've been mentioning the reproductive system. How does that play into that?
Yeah, so that's the one other thing the pituitary does, very importantly, is that it helps to control reproduction. And it does that by telling the ovary to make hormones. So estrogen is one of the main hormones. And so if you're taking something like birth control pills, what you're taking is a low level estrogen to kind of keep the ovary shut off. So it's not making hormones in a cycle. But the pituitary is kind of what's stimulating the ovary to make those hormones in the cycle. Okay. And then the other thing the ovary does is to make the eggs to be able to be fertilized. But the pituitary controls both of those processes. Yeah. Oh, so it's a really cool, and the brain controls the pituitary. So it's there are all these hormone axes. So brain, pituitary, gonad or ovary is the one that I'm studying. And that project is a really fun collaborative project with another lab on campus.
Okay. So obviously you've done a lot of cool work in all these reproductive diseases and issues specific to female bodies. Yeah. So what are some of the biggest impacts you've seen from your work, especially towards the female community?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I probably don't do as good of a job as I should about doing outreach, but I'm trying to change that. So there was one paper that we published looking at the effect of a contaminant in drinking water that we found with Dr. Jody Flaws, we found affected reproduction, and I was able to actually get an interview on our local NPR station about that. And that really, I felt was great because I actually had people call me that heard it to say that. So I'm like, okay, hopefully, I know some of my friends heard it, but hopefully that actually, got out a little bit further. Yeah. And then last week I spoke for the Urbana-Champaign Reproductive Justice Week. So Julie Lout, who's a wonderful community organizer, has this grassroots organization that is essentially making sure that there is an advocate for women's reproductive rights. So access to birth control, access to healthcare, access to healthy child care, all of that is reproductive justice. And so I gave a talk on environmental chemicals and their impact on female reproduction and what to do to avoid them.
Oh, wow. That is so cool. Oh,
so hoping I'm making some impact. Yeah, we publish papers and things, all the normal stuff that scientists would do, do experiments, publish papers. But then, it's really important to be able to spread your work to a broad audience.
For sure, yeah.
The other cool thing that I do, which you might be interested in, is part of the Endocrine Society, I actually lobby in Washington, D.C. So we go to meet our representatives. So when Rodney Davis was the representative for the area, I met with his office, and then I met with him on Zoom one of the years when it had to move to Zoom. And I've met Dick Durbin's office and Tammy Duckworth's office. And so we talk about essentially like things, funding for research, that the government should continue that. But then we also talked about things like the special diabetes program to make insulin affordable. And so that's another way that you can have an impact, is to actually just talk to your legislators so that they understand why female health, reproductive health is important and why there should be research on it.
Oh, for sure.
I find it really fascinating how a lot of the time science and politics get intertwined, especially in kind of like with women and like things like reproductive health.
Yes. Yeah, I know. And it is really, it's very frustrating because I think they don't talk to the doctors. The politicians don't always talk to the doctors and the scientists to get the reasons behind, what's happening. And they listen to their constituents who have a view, but then they don't understand maybe there's medical reasons for some of these things that need to happen.
For sure.
What's kind of an average day in your life like? Like all of your routine of teaching and doing research?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's actually one of the best parts of this job. I'd say travel is maybe number one, but number two is that your day is different every single time. Like I really couldn't tell you an average day because literally it's different every day. But I'll give you a little bit of an idea of like what I would do like a normal day. So a day that I don't teach every day. I have a class that's Tuesday, Thursdays from 9:30 to 11. And then I have a research ethics class that's in the evenings from 6 to 8, around 6 to 7:45. So but it's only in the fall semester. So that's my big teaching is then. But compared to like a high school teacher where they're teaching multiple classes a day, right? This is it. So I really have a good amount of time to think about the lecture, getting prepared for it, think about activities that I'm going to do with regard to the lecture. And then my main class, I should mention, is called endocrinology. Not surprisingly, like hormones. So that's what I'm teaching. And so I will, if it would be a Tuesday, that would be a day of the class. The class would start at 9:30. So I would, on Monday, I would have spent plenty of time making sure all the material was up to date and posted. Probably would have been working on the lecture a little bit the week before, but Monday would be go time. I want everything on the website so everybody can see it before they come to class on Tuesday. Then I'll talk from 9:30 to 11. I will have probably a meeting at 11 with one of my students. I usually meet with all my students once a week, so kind of spread it out among the week. So I would probably have a meeting with a student. I'm on a lot of campus committees, so I would also have a meeting either with maybe the courses and curriculum committee, or I'm on the director of the graduate program, and I meet several times. So I do kind of these. They're important, but meetings are more boring. I don't have time to do experiments myself anymore, so I leave that to my lab, but then they will always come and tell me if they have things that they're doing. And then the rest of the time, I'm either writing papers or writing grants or, sitting at my computer a lot.
Yeah.
But the life of a scientist when you're getting into the career is all active. You're standing at the bench, you're running around, you're doing things. You might be sitting for a seminar class here or there, but you're really very active all day. I think I've become fairly sedentary as I've gotten further along in the career. But but the daily life of a scientist is pretty active, and it's cool. I'm probably really more boring at this point. I sit, I type, I answer email. I spend quite a bit of the day answering email, actually, too.
Yeah, I'd imagine, Who would you say your classes are normally for? Like pre-med students, or like what's the general demographic, I guess, of like majors and stuff that normally come to your classes?
Yeah, that's a great thing. So my endocrinology class is definitely pre-meds. So that's what it's more or less geared to. However, there's also grad students who didn't have access to like a class like that, or maybe their biology background is not quite as strong because they did undergrad training in a different area and now are coming to grad school. So yeah, it's usually pre-meds and grad students, but I do try to talk about research too. So I have had plenty of students who wanted a research career that also take my class, but I try to use human examples, health examples. So I would talk about a topic, but then go over essentially a patient case of somebody that has an endocrine disorder. I mentioned growth is one of the things. It's just such an obvious one, so it's an easy example. If the pituitary doesn't form, you don't grow, you have dwarfism.
Okay.
And if you have a tumor that makes too much growth hormone in the pituitary, you get gigantism. So it's like I try to talk through cases like that and talk about it within context of the human disease.
Okay, that's so cool.
What are some of the cool experiments you're doing right now in your labs?
Okay, yeah. So I'll talk about one project that's going on. So we, during the pandemic, everybody got isolated, but scientists got really isolated too. We weren't able to be in our labs to do experiments. And we all kind of felt like we were kind of losing control over the research direction. So we had a group of people that got together, started every week, now we're every other week, and we call ourselves the Gland Gang. And so we actually had enough discussions and enough, we were able to get enough data that we all got a grant together now. So my favorite project going on in my lab right now has to do with this particular group of people that I'm loving to interact with. And so we found one of our members has human patients that have that hypopituitarism, the disease that my lab studies in terms of development. And so she has patients that she knows the gene that has the problem, the gene that has the base change that causes the problem, but you don't know what that does. So she has no idea why this little blip on her chart causes the disease in the person. And if you understand how it causes the disease, you might be able to treat it. So what the several other labs are doing are taking some of these genes and actually trying to understand their function. Okay. So we have experiments that are looking at the function of a couple of the things that she's found that are patient disease causing genes. And I have a wonderful grad student who's just been super excited about that.
Oh, that's so cool. I'm sure that helps a lot of people for sure.
Yeah. All right. What are some of the things that have fascinated you the most out of everything you've learned in your career?
I love how fast science changes, and I think that that's another great part of this career is that you're always just learning new things. And so there's been this big push for the coolest thing that I'm excited about right now is what they call single cell transcriptomics. So that's a really fancy term, but it's essentially if you looked, you could take any one cell in your body and know every gene that is making a protein that's there.
Wow.
And so it's so cool, right?
Yeah.
Because I can look at the pituitary and know like, well, I know this cell makes a hormone, but now I know all the other things it makes too, in addition to that hormone. And then again, like for diseases, you possibly maybe the hormone is being made okay, but then one of those other things that the cell needs to do is wrong. Mm-hmm. So now that I know that cell has all these other things in it, and so this has just been probably within the last 5 years, this single cell technology has taken off. And so instead of studying things at an organ level, you're really looking at things at a cell in the organ.
That's so cool.
And that's so you're always learning new things as a scientist, and that's the new thing that I'm learning. And my students, I had a student who graduated, and now my new student has taken up learning how you have to really good at computer, you have to code in R to do the data analysis.
Oh, yeah.
So I have a student that's learning that. I'm eventually going to have to learn how to do it. I'm relying on Juan right now.
Yeah.
Has anything shocked you or turned out different than you expected in your research?
All the time. Most things don't end up usually going quite how you expected. I can tell you a story about the environmental chemical side of what we're doing. So my student Yinka, she was looking at these chemicals called phthalates that are also present in plastics and personal care products like perfume and lipstick. Mm-hmm. And so we were looking at their effect on reproductive aging. And the whole hypothesis had been that these chemicals would cause inflammation. We were sure that, but the inflammation would be in the reproductive organs, so in the pituitary or in the ovary, that they would cause inflammation, and that would make them age quicker.
Oh, okay.
However, that is not. They are definitely affecting the inflammatory system, but they seem to be acting, at least in the short way we're looking at it, they actually decrease some inflammatory markers. They don't increase them. Yeah, in both the pituitary in my studies and in the ovary in Dr. Flaw's studies. So, like, who knew, right?
Yeah.
So it's bad that it's changing the inflammation, because then the person might not have the right response.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, you need inflammation in the ovary to ovulate an egg. Mm-hmm. So this might be affecting fertility in that way, but just not at all the same way we thought. So this is going to probably open up quite a large can of worms / news story. But
sure.
So that happens all the time. I mean, I just pulled the most recent thing, but I think I could probably go back every year and come up with something like, whoop, that was a surprise.
Yeah.
But it's fun because then it makes you read more, you get the data, and then you go and you read literature to see what other people have published. You call your friend on the phone who's working on something similar and say, hey, what's going on here?
Yeah.
So what are some of those like ingredients or products like that you would find in Target, that is affecting the inflammation?
Yeah, we're definitely worried about the phthalates. I don't think they're as worrisome as the bisphenols in some contexts, but the phthalates, if you see something that says fragrance on it, it contains the chemical phthalate to distribute the fragrance evenly in the thing.
Yeah.
So be it body wash or shampoo or whatever. So it'll have phthalates in it. Mm-hmm. A low level of exposure that most people have is, most of the time probably not bad. But if you're constantly microwaving food in plastic or eating hot French fries in a plastic coated bag, and like there's if you have constant levels of exposure, that's when it starts to become a worry. Yeah, but so many products, anything that says fragrance will have it, but also plastics, any sort of plastics. So and these chemicals aren't bound to the plastic, so they can come out if they're heated or if a solution is acidic. Mm-hmm. So tomato sauce putting in the plastic is going to get the chemicals out.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Do you have any words of wisdom for like future generations of women in STEM? I know you mentioned like internships earlier, but any like steps or like specific things you'd really recommend for getting into like neuroscience or biology in general?
Yeah, so definitely try like talking to people. You guys might not be on LinkedIn yet, but that is a good way to communicate. So you make a profile and you can message people who have a job that looks like something that you might want. Oh, okay. And people are pretty kind in that forum about writing back and saying, yep, this is what my job is like, or if you want me to talk through what a day in my job is like. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, not everyone is going to respond, but I've found that when I've recommended that to people, they've been happy with the results. And a lot of times it's people, the grad students I have that are interested in not being in academia anymore, like not wanting to necessarily be a professor, but they might want to work in industry or work for the government, and they don't know what the jobs are like. Yeah. So I think it's never too early to start asking people like, what does your job look like? Exactly what you're doing now, to just get some sense of what you think you might want to do. Can change, but just like at that moment, because then there's always little steps you can do to show your interest. Yeah. At the next level, when somebody's looking at your resume for med school or for grad school, they're going to want to look at the activities you did. Like it's certainly your grades are important, but your activities are also actually really important, and showing enthusiasm for the topic and showing leadership. And I think that those intangibles are huge. Like what you're doing right now is really impactful. And I think I would encourage anyone to find what they like that's not just their academics and spend time doing it and doing some leadership roles in it, because that really helps you get on to the next step. Yeah. And I think specifically for women, I feel like women are asked to do more. Mm-hmm. I mean, and maybe it's not a universal that everyone would do that, but I find that that's true. That has been true in my career. I have had more service than the males in my department. And I think that's something you have to learn pretty early on, is how to say no, how to say yes to the things that you are career affirming and make you happy, and say no to the stuff that you don't want to do. Yeah. And it really, at least for my generation, women more often than not would just, like, somebody would ask you to do something and you just, well, they asked me to do it, I need to do it. And my male colleagues would just be like, no. And then no one would get mad at them. They would just not have to do it.
Yeah.
But then my nature was just somebody asked me to do it and I would do it.
Mm-hmm.
But you can get lots and lots of extra service that's not your job if you don't kind of, remember that you can say no to things and keep your career kind of in mind.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that you've had to say no to?
So some of the easy things I can say no to is that when scientists do a study, you have to write a paper on it. Mm-hmm. And I get asked all the time as an expert in my field to review other people's studies and make comments. And one of those can take me a whole day to do a review. And I get many requests a week. So I have learned I have to say no to a lot of those because it would take up all of my time.
Yeah.
I've also been asked to do some service jobs that I have for the campus that I didn't want to do. So that and you can say no. You can pick and choose what you're doing. But knowing you can say no is actually like a big, affirming thing. And it was my female mentor here on campus, Dr. Ann Narduli, who's the one that every time I was asked to do something that was campus service, her office was at the end of the hallway, and I'd go, I just got asked to do this. And she would say, that's a good thing, or I wouldn't do it. And so having a mentor that you can bounce things off of is really important.
For sure. I feel like we even have to do that now, like even in high school and stuff, for sure, of like picking and choosing what you're going to do and what clubs you want to do, what sports you want to do. Like you can't just do everything because it's just going to overwhelm you so much. And I do for sure think women have the expectation of just like, you get asked, you say yes.
Yeah. So unfortunately, that is still the case now. But that's so I think that's a good skill to learn.
For sure.
Yeah. Maybe let's end it off by saying, what do you hope that the future generation of scientists can do to carry on your work in endocrinology and reproductive diseases? Yeah.
So I'm not the type of person that really cares if my exact research is carried on. I'm just hoping that I trained a couple of awesome people that will end up to go do great things. Yeah. One of my trainees is now an assistant professor at the University of North Carolina, and she's working in heart development now. that's fantastic. So that's really what I hope my legacy is that the people that I train go off to do amazing things and kind of keep their careers going, because that's really, at the end of the day, that's more. I mean, we do these experiments, we publish them in journals. Some of them will make a health impact, some of them will make a public impact, a lot of them won't. They'll just be a small stepping stone, so that eventually someone will make the big leap. But day to day, what I can do to be impactful is train the next generation and empower them to say no to things, empower them to achieve their dreams, to really go for what they want to do.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Thank you so much for all of your great words.
Yeah, and thank you for using your time to come here and talk to us. We really appreciate it.
This was exciting. I'm so glad to have been here, and I hope your listeners will feel excited about women in STEM and know the future is very, very bright.